My name is Daniel Medina. For those of you who don't know me, I am the office manager and the math guy here at Investors Advantage. Company has been around since 1979, founded by John Grace. We are primarily financial planning and money management firm. And here comes John.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm so glad you're the main math man because you do it a whole lot better than I'll ever get to it. So it does take a team. And I mean, boy, a lot of things are happening right now. We're going to touch on a number of those issues. Primarily, I give a quick overview, and then we'll get to Dr. Paul Hersh to have an understanding of what people are complaining about with their therapists or bringing up as issues and how we may process some of those things, okay? But gee whiz, who thought you could, allegedly try to pass a $20 bill and get killed? Who thought that was going to happen? Meantime, I was just talking to a friend of mine who happens to be a councilman with the city of Westlake Village, and he tells me they had a council meeting last night, opened it up to the public, and one of the questions was, what would have to happen for us to name a street in Westlake Village called Black Lives Matter? I mean, you just can't make this stuff up, but stick around because it's going to be live and it's going to be in color and it's going to play on TV. So I'm calling this session, for my part, a possible bull market trap. Let's see if we can't put things in perspective. It's warm today. And Mother Nature has a way of showing up in ways that can ravage and upset a lot of things. And just to give a perspective in terms of it being warm, I'm going to have a suggestion for you, but let's just go back a little bit because it wasn't that long ago. In fact, I think it was on October 23rd, 2018, that President Donald Trump, whose birthday is, by the way, June 14th, I believe he turned 74 this year, said, we're tired of giving California hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars all the time for their forest fires. Now, it might be helpful for all of us to understand that 60% of the forests are government-owned. Government-owned, 60%. Maybe just as importantly, it might be worthy of recognizing when we're counting things that the state of California ranks 5th in gross domestic product in the world, 5th in the world. And that's ahead of the UK, ahead of France, and behind Germany, just to put it in perspective. I mean, that's a whole lot of buying power. Now, we'll talk about not only the fires that could be disrupted, but the floods that have been disrupted, because I think given what's going on, we've got to be prepared for hurricanes and earthquakes and all kinds of things that seem like they could happen at the same time. So, you remember just a couple of years ago that the Santa Ana winds, and it started right here in Ventura County, lo and behold, got up to 70, 80 miles per hour. And in less than a week, we're threatening parts of Santa Barbara. I'm afraid that this kind of thing is going to happen again. And just to kind of recount things, you remember that this was a 14-day red flag event in Southern California, December of 2017, that broke all records in history. And the Thomas Fire was the 10th most destructive fire in modern history, again, that began right here in Ventura County. So, get ready. And by the way, I promise you a tip. One of the things I learned from a fire captain, particularly when it's warm, he says you should do this every day, but I'm saying particularly when it's warm, before you leave the house, close every door in the house. He says he cannot tell us how many times he's come across homes where much of the home is destroyed, but there are rooms that are totally intact. I can't breathe. If the fire can't breathe, it can't get into that room. But if we leave the door open, we leave a lot of energy, a whole lot of air for the fire to consume, and a whole lot of content. Now we feel sorry about what just went away. So yeah, when it gets warm like this, before you leave, get in the car, close every door on your way out the house every single day. Now, the other thing we're going to have to watch for is another extreme, and that's a flood. From what I can find, this came from the UCLA Institute of Environment and Sustainability on April 23rd, 18. The study found that over the next 40 years, the state will be 300 to 400% more likely to have a prolonged storm sequence as severe as the one that caused the now legendary California flood more than 150 years ago. Now, wrap your mind around this if you can. That's when 1/3 of the state's taxable land was destroyed, and incoming Governor Leland Stanford was forced to row to his inauguration in Sacramento. Row to his inauguration. So what UCLA study finds is that Maybe history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, and we better be ready for more things than we ever imagined. So these are unprecedented times, which I submit to you call for unprecedented responses. And we're going to really get down to the two things that we think you need to focus on, because there's so much to look at, but we want to really focus on the things that are the most important pieces of the puzzle. So our agenda is to, pretty much through the introduction, the two questions we'll focus on so that you can see it. We'll get to the 9 issues that people are bringing up with their therapists, just so that we can all recognize the emotions, honor them, and process them, so they don't, make us want to commit suicide or do harm when we don't need to do harm, okay? And keep in mind, in terms of what's going on right now, when it comes to financial planning, I mean, we've seen a gain, I think, for March 23rd, in excess of over 40%. However, today, right now, the Dow and the S&P for the year remain in negative territory. The only index that is up is the NASDAQ, after more than a 40% gain. So what I'm trying to say to you is something's going on here, and we want to believe that happy days are here again. I'm going to say maybe not so fast, maybe not so much. This thing could turn around in a minute. And I love the saying, when man plans, God laughs. So we've got to be ready for, as they say, a pullback. I think it will be serious. I think it will be, I don't know when it will occur, but recognize, just to put it in perspective, at some point of around 1930, we saw with the Dow, that was the only index at the time, as at the time for 6 months, there was a 50% gain in the market, 50% that held for about half a year. But in the span of 30 months, what was a magnificent gain turned into a magnificent loss to the tune of about 80%. So be careful of some of the news that you hear that everything's fine and it's off to the races, because I don't see it that way. So let's talk a little more about financial planning. It's very important that you discover, how will I not outlive my money, and what happens to me if I die too soon. So let's get to number 1 to help you put it in perspective, because it's not that difficult, but it's a job that we have to do. So let's suppose we've got a couple here that are married, 35, with 2 kids, and have an income of about $100,000. She's making $60,000. He's making $40,000. By the way, to put things in perspective, the average household income in America is approximately $65,000, $66,000. And I will say to you, yes, it's true. While that's the highest number we've ever seen, your buying power was more powerful 10 years ago, because for the first 4 years, the average household income actually declined 10 years ago. And then it's always been behind the average cost of increases for cars and healthcare and food and housing. So we're not as good as it used to be. And I would submit to you that when President Trump says it's the best economy ever, absolutely true for our clients who are the top 1%. For the rest of us, not so true. So, and by the way, we're going to talk more about this on March 24th. So we'll want to make sure that you pay attention to that, because we want you to join us. So these folks plan on trying to make work optional at age 70. And that's the first question. When do you want to make work optional? Is it 62? Is it 65? Is it 70? Is it 72? You make up the year, and then do the math to see what it takes for that to occur, where I have sufficient funds behind door number 1 so that I can have the same kind of income. In this case, they want to replicate $100,000 for the next 20 or 30 years without ever having to work again. And I do not have to go try and be a Walmart greeter when I know I won't be accepted because I'm overqualified. So again, how much money is needed to make work optional? Picking up where we're left off with our example here, where they're trying to replicate $100,000. So we're going to give them credit for starting Social Security. And by the way, this is one of the questions. When is it best for you to start Social Security? I didn't ask you how soon you can get it, which is the answer most people look for. That's a bad question, because you're only going to see the first answer. You might look to see what makes sense for you and your family. Please recognize that with Social Security, up until age 70, no matter how soon you are eligible, each year you can afford to delay taking Social Security, it's an 8% increase. What else do you know is going to go up by 8% per year? Really almost no matter what. So for people who are planning to die right away, we say start Social Security right away. For people who feel like, no, I'm going to stick around here, then we're saying, okay, let's see what we can do to keep things going so that you don't have to necessarily start Social Security as early as you possibly can, where you might be able to afford to delay taking Social Security so that you can see all of that increase, okay? So assuming that, we've got them at age 70, so they will need $2.6 million at age 70. $2.6 million. We want you to see your target clearly. How much money are you going to need when you reach fill in the blank age? We want you to see, in this case, it's 2.6. Okay, we've already done the math. It's what we do. It's what Daniel does. Thank you very much. To make sure that we can see, this is what I have, this is what I need to contribute. And in this case, to reach their goal, they'll set aside, successfully reach their goal, they'll set aside 15% from the top, not the bottom of the paycheck at the end of the month, at the top of the paycheck every month. And they're hoping to average about an 8% return. If those two things happen, the math is they'll have 2.6. Now, nothing's perfect, and it won't be just exactly the way you might have planned it, right? Man plans, God laughs. But to the extent that you're looking at this at least annually to see what adjustments need to be made, just as you do if the income goes up or the income goes down, you have to make adjustments. If the account doesn't do 8%, you know, how do I make the adjustments? Do I need to pump up my contributions? Remember, I need to pay myself first, beginning of the month, to maybe 16%, 20%. For many of us, it's about 20%. And for those of us who've lost a lot of time, sometimes it's even more than that. But, you know, we'll pay for GMAC, we'll pay the house note, the rent. We don't pay ourselves first. And maybe that's one of the good things that's come out of this COVID-19, where people look to their priorities differently and recognize if I'm about spend, baby, spend, that's good for the economy, but it's not good for my personal household economy. And who should be first? I submit it should be you. So 2.6 million in this case. What is your goal? That is the question. All right, now let's look at, that's what happens if you live too long. How much money are you going to need so that you don't outlive your money? As I say, how much money are you going to need past your last paycheck so you can afford to live just the way you were without ever having to work? Then we need to look at the other side of the equation. Let's suppose there are two people in a household. Doesn't matter if they're married, but you're interdependent upon each other's income. The question becomes, how much money does each survivor need? Now, our peers often say, oh, you need 500,000, or, you know, and you go, oh, I'm good, right? I don't even make 500,000, ha, ha, ha. I'm worth more dead than alive. Well, let's do the math and let's not be silly. So let's suppose, again, we're looking at this couple with $100,000. She's earning 60,000, he's earning 40,000. So the question we want him to ask is, how much money do you need if she dies? And we want her to ask, how much money do you need if he dies? Think of it this way. I might miss you, but I do not want to miss a dime of what you used to bring into this equation. I want the money supply to remain the same. I do not want to, you know, see you go to heaven and leave me having to try to deal with all this that we were trying to do ourselves. So let's see what our answers are. How much is needed in each case? So he needs on her 1.5 million. Okay, that provides him the equivalent of what he needs in terms of what she used to make. And she needs 1 million of life insurance on him so that she has the equivalent of his $40,000. And there's the math, assuming a 4% distribution, we might be getting 6, 7, 8% as return, but if we keep withdrawals 4% or lower, we increase the chances of not running out of money before we run out of time. So 1.5 would be needed on her with a 4% withdrawal rate to provide $60,000 a year. And then, you know, we want to keep that spending level pretty static. Hopefully it can go up if the account goes up, And then she knows that on him, she has $1 million on him, so that if something happens to him, she presents a death certificate, she puts the money to work, 5, 6, 7, 8%, hopefully annual basis, 4% withdrawal is 40,000. Now, you know, in this case, she knows if he goes to heaven, financially, it's a non-event. That's what we want. We've got enough things going on. We don't need any more drama. All right, so let's look at our 3 essential steps to inoculate your portfolio. Inoculate your portfolio against the good, the bad, and the unforeseen. according to me, I'm famous for saying it's not about the prediction. It's all about the preparation. And most of us, we put some money somewhere and it goes up, we feel good. It goes down, we feel bad. No, let's figure out what the target is, living too long or dying too soon. And how can we limit the losses? Because that's what we find for the clients that we have the pleasure of working with. The savvy investors we've come to know seem to hate losses more than they love gains. So, be more diversified is one of our recommendations. Outside of cash, bonds, and stocks that typically are just the options within exchange traded funds and mutual funds. More than those, we want 5 or 6 legs under your portfolio stool, as opposed to 2 or 3 legs. We can agree that more legs makes the portfolio more defensive, or certainly more solid in terms of substance. Right? It's harder to break 5 legs under a stool. And do real planning, not just guesswork or, well, I think it's going to work. No, figure it out, do the math. And then our next recommendation is active management. And the best way I can describe that is, remember the movie Karate Kid, wax on, wax off? So imagine you had $1 million January of 08, and if it was fully invested, you stayed pretty much with 5% of the balance in cash, 95% invested. But that would be more of a passive approach. And there are pros and cons to both. But particularly for people who are taking withdrawals, we prefer a more active approach. So instead of holding the shares, we waxed off. In other words, we went from 95% invested, 5% cash to 100% cash by year end. And it was done automatically behind the scenes for the benefit of the clients. They didn't have to do anything. The systems were designed that way. So as the volatility increases, the cash value increases. So people finish the year not 95% investment, but maybe 60, 70, 95% in cash of 2008, wax off. And then in 2009, starting as early as March 9th, we can see the melt up occurring in a very big way. Now we want to wax on. We want to be fully invested in 2009. And that means the active managers are looking at your accounts daily with the question, is it more fuel that we need to put on this fire? Or is it water? If it's going up, yeah, we want more fuel. But if it's going down, like we saw even fourth quarter 2018, we want to be out of the market as much as we can to limit the losses, so we don't need a Hail Mary pass. So the math is, in 2008, many of our clients saw a loss of no more than 20% and a gain in many cases of no less than 25%. If that is the case, a loss of 20 offset by a gain of 25 means you're back to even. Most passive accounts, whether they were exchange traded funds or mutual funds, took about 3, 4, as close as 5 years to get back to even during a very robust market. So suppose the robust market hadn't shown up. Well, then you might not still be back to even, and we can talk about that. So that's why we say, let's do what we can to limit the losses so that you can be in the game without needing that Hail Mary pass, or trying to hit a home run just to get your team back in the game. No, let's limit the losses so that you can see I'm increasing my odds of not running out of money before I run out of time. So we like doing this kind of work, and we appreciate your feedback because you give us ideas about who we should bring in to discuss some topical issues. And we've been proactive with our clients and talking with them about how much risk can you accept. We will send to you after we're finished today a little 2-minute video that has been very well received. I think we've had over 400 people watch the 2-minute video. We cover a lot of ground in 2 minutes. And then we're going to include, in what we said to you, is part 2. So part 1 is watch the video. And then part 2 is fill in the blanks so that you answer the most important question I could possibly ask you. How much risk can you accept? I didn't ask you if you were conservative, moderate, or aggressive, because the problem is that I don't know what those terms mean, and most investors don't either. So why are we using terms that really serve no purpose whatsoever? What we want you to know is the loss you can accept at 8%? Is it 40%? Whatever it is, that's your answer. Now, how might we design the portfolio so that it could perform potentially within your specific parameters, okay? Because it's clear that, the market takes the stairs up and the elevator down. And the 2 headwinds that I see right now that you're not hearing about, it's not just the second wave of COVID-19, it's the second wave of bankruptcy, corporate bankruptcies, to companies like Hersh and JCPenney's and Pier 1 and Neiman Marcus. J. Crew, just to name a few. I think that's those are clouds on the wind, and those are clouds on the horizon. The second big cloud that I see that you're not hearing about yet, but I think you will, is a replay of fourth quarter 2018. That's when the tariffs became news. And remember, fourth quarter 2018, roughly September 21 through Christmas Eve, market's off 20%. You just saw a 30% decline. I think we're going to retest those. But as I say, at the end of the day, what kind of loss can you accept, and how can the portfolio be designed in such a way where you can live with those losses as opposed to feel real bad real fast? All right, so we have Dr. Paul Hersh on tap. And Paul and I go way back because I could use all the help he could provide. And one of the things that he is famous for, according to me, is his line, you know, the only way out is through. And I'm happy to say that Paul has counseled individuals and families for over 50,000 hours. That sounds like a lot. He began his career back in the late 80s when he was all of 19. And it became abundantly clear to Paul that he wanted to become a highly effective therapist. He set the bar high, didn't he? But to do that, it meant that there was no shortcuts, and he would have to do something to become masterful. And that was his goal, and I think he accomplished it. So he was driven to learn from the best of his field, which I think is a good way to become masterful. Not the mediocre people. Let's go to the people who are getting the A's and the really bright folks and see if they can help us learn what they have come to know. And he says that it's simple for him, you know, that he would be curious, he would be courageous, and he would be honest. So he has a Bachelor's of Arts degree in psychology from Cal State Northridge, a Master's of Arts degree in marriage and family therapy from Phillips Institute, and a doctorate in clinical psychology from Ryokan College. So I've been married happily, still married. I remember when he got married, and his first, one child, a beautiful daughter, you know, takes after her mom. Mom, God bless you. So what I want Paul to cover, and please post questions for Paul or for me, so Daniel can make sure that we address your concerns or the things you're thinking about. And we've been really impressed with the questions that you all have posed here. So, and this is one of the reasons why we keep doing this every week. So Paul, bring us up to date. What are the 9 primary issues that so many people today in this COVID-19 environment are, you know, sharing with the therapist, and help us not only to identify these issues, but to address them in a way where we feel like we can be whole again, no matter what the heck's going on.
Okay, John, Paul's on, but he is still on mute. So give me a second. I'm trying to get him online.
All right.
How we doing?
There we go. Was that his voice?
This is me talking. Let's see how this is going.
Okay. Voice is a good start.
Let's see.
Here we go.
How's that?
Beautiful.
You can hear me okay? Everything's all right? Daniel, are we okay?
Yes.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. And thank you so much, John, and as well your staff that I've gotten the pleasure to meet, Daniel and Jasmine. As John said, I've been around a long time in this Conejo Valley. I've been practicing as a therapist for over 25 years here and had the pleasure to do that. And so thank you all for being here. I'm going to try to do my best to share some of the things that I've learned in as fast and as simple and effective way as I can. So what John and I spoke about, and he really was interested in, is what are the things that people are bringing up the most? And so in front of you, you'll have what people are bringing up the most. But what I want to do first is I want to set the stage to what it appears to me that is going on for most people, okay? So most of us understand now that the brain works as a pattern recognizing machine. So if you leave a room and you come back in that room, if something's there that you haven't seen before, you don't have to think. Your automated system notices the difference in the picture and alerts your system that something's different. So, and the brain likes to know where things are. It likes consistency. If too much uncertainty happens, it kicks off what we all know about as the fight or flight response. What we know is that people don't do well with sustained uncertainty. In other words, people don't do well with too much chaos, okay? the cortisol running through us. As we all know at this point, the effect of stress if we don't manage it well. Another way of looking at that, if you look at his history, is that life has always included a lot of suffering. It has always included tragedy. The hope is that you don't get hit with too much malevolence, right? But the antidote is the same. The antidote is to find purpose and take responsibility for doing what you can to fight it. And so the idea of that is if we leave our well-being to the primal system, we're in trouble, because these systems that are back here are old, they're ancient, they're there for survival. They're not there, they're there to get us to 18. They're not there to help us enjoy a beautiful life for a long time. That's new. That has to do with our frontal neocortex. That's the latest thing to develop for humans. So the idea is you want this part of your brain to engage, to make plans so that the automated systems don't keep driving the show, right? Because again, they will panic. Too much uncertainty without grounding ourselves isn't good, right? So this is basically testing everyone's paradigm for how they go about life. And although it's created a lot of hardship in many ways that we'll talk about, it's also a huge opportunity because it gives people a chance to see what they haven't been seeing. Like for an example, most of my clients that are from war-torn countries, let's say, are not taking their masks off yet, right? They've been through this. They're not as affected, truly, as some of the people that aren't used to this, unless they're new, like maybe came here as children. But most of the people who have immigrated here from war-torn countries are saying things like, to me, like, Paul, I've had to do this for 2.5 years. And it wasn't like if you go down to the street, you might catch something, you would die. So those people have had experience. And most of us, unless people are older, like my mother who's born in 1932, she's been around tragedy. A lot of us haven't to this degree, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run through this list rather quickly of what people are presenting. And then what I wanna do is, since we just have a bit of time, is just get into some of the solutions that have been helping people. So, let's see. So quickly we'll say, all right, I feel burned out, right? Right, because that is a symptom of sustained stress. It's a symptom of not having enough purpose, responsibility, routine, some way to see the light at the end of the tunnel. If it becomes too repetitive, we don't do well, and that's where major depression can kick in, or some of the more serious anxiety disorders. I feel really worried about my family. Okay, get it, you should, right? Makes sense, and then we're gonna talk about how we deal with that. I feel guilty finding pockets of joy in my life about all this, in all of this. And most of us might have heard of survivor guilt. So if some tragedy happens and many people die, the people that survive won't feel right about it, right? Why? Because the brain can't quite get its head around what's happened, right? Because we don't know exactly why or what's happened and why we made it. And so the idea is to normalize that for people, that it's okay to feel guilty. It makes sense. It's like when people come into therapy and they might have had a very good parents, but didn't know to do things very differently than they did. And so there's a lot of bad things happened. And they might tell me about that. They might talk to me about their father. And as they do, even though he was a good man, he did some bad things, they start to get this feeling of guilt. And they're not used to it. And most of those people have never been to therapy. Once we work with that a little bit, they can get some experience with it. And then they have a relationship with that guilt that doesn't overwhelm them. So we'll come to this in our solutions, but make sure people are sharing about what you're going through. I don't know what the future, I'm grieving the loss of my old life. Of course, welcome to tragedy. Number 5, I don't know what my future looks like anymore, and that scares me, right? Back to uncertainty, that's That is the reality right now. And what do we do with it? What do we do about it is what I'll speak to. I'm worried about your money. Again, uncertainty and safety. Being home all the time has created friction with my partner. Again, I'm going to speak to that specifically, but again, this is testing us. It's testing our ability to stay in our adult, mature mindset rather than being ungrounded and uncontained. And it's not easy. No one is able to do it perfectly. I'm questioning my faith, of course, right? Like in my business, I deal with quite a few different belief systems, and everybody is wondering why and how and who and what's going on. And in general, those with faith are doing better because they have some paradigm, right, to try to understand it. But you don't have to. You just have to be able to look at history and again, just gain the support that's out there that people like me are trying to disseminate. Okay. The last one, I feel the whole world is anxious right now. Well, natural phenomena, almost all natural phenomena operates in a bell curve. So, how many, the size of trees, most trees are this size. Then there's giant trees and little trees. Most of the world is very anxious. And you will meet some people that are extreme in their panic, and you'll meet people that are almost stoic as to what's happening. Okay, so let's what we'll do now is we'll start getting into what to do about it. So I'm just going to sync up my screens here. Daniel, what we're going to do is we're going to start with continue to engage with people. Okay. So the first topic has to do with engaging with people, and as we all know, why are people rushing out onto the beaches and rushing into restaurants? Of course, we want to do that, and and it's a good thing to do that if we can do it with care, right? But you can see the impulsivity where people are feeling so constrained and they just want to jump out and get out there. I'll leave it to some other people as to how dangerous or not dangerous that is. We might deal with that in some question and answer, but the bottom line is, there's a great TED Talk by a woman named Brene Brown, who did a lot of research on our need for connectivity. And we know that we do better connected to other people. In fact, the level of our intimacy with other people has a direct correlation to how satisfied we will be through life, through time. So it is an absolute fact that if you can connect in any way safely, online, Zoom, 6 feet away, 20 feet away, in any way with people, particularly that you're close to, we know that's good for people and helps with sustaining the trauma that we're in. Okay. Even though it's best to be intimate, it's best to be with people that you're close to so that you can actually share how hard this is, because the more vulnerable you could be, the better off that depth will be, the better off that connection will be, and the better off the healing will be, the medicine actually for your system. Even though that's true, connecting with any human being, even in the slightest way, it all adds up. So we encourage everybody to pick up the phone and contact people you haven't contact in a while. It's more important than people realize. Okay. So the next thing we'll talk about is taking action where you can. And it's an interesting thing. If you look at mountaineering stories, adventure stories, like what happens when people get caught on the top of a mountain and they broke their leg and there's like almost no chance of survival, and how do they get down, right? But if you study that, there's absolute commonality between the people that tend to make it. Okay, the people that tend to make it are aware that there's this thing operating, this panic, this fear that could envelop them. And so your most experienced mountaineers make it. Why? Because they've generally been through that and they practice this technique. And what do? They try their best to shut the fear out and focus on what they have to do, right? So they'll say to themselves, I don't know how I'm gonna get down the mountain, but I can get to that tree. And then I'll worry about the rest. I'll just get to that tree. So they hobble to that tree. What do? All right, I'll get to that tree. And they just keep going, right? So, so what are we saying there? We're saying that this thing can be a black hole if we let it. How do we not? How do we engage this part of our brain? This is the part of our brain that can plan, that can premeditatively plan for something we're going to do tomorrow. Okay. That's why it's always, if you wanted to work out, it's always best to say, all right, I'll work out tomorrow at 9 o'clock, exactly 1 minute, maybe call somebody, tell them to call you at 9, right? Rather than expecting yourself to wake up and be motivated, right? Motivation only goes so far. True grit and willingness is oftentimes the more important thing to get started. Okay. So, so the idea is, where you can, some people feel that people wearing masks or sanitizer, you know, sanitizing everything are just nuts, right? Maybe they are. It doesn't matter. The truth is if you're doing some things that help you feel safer, keep doing them, okay? So in other words, we want to combat the uncertainty so that we don't give into hopelessness, and we don't give into helplessness, okay? So along with doing things that work for you to help you feel safer, what we're getting into next is how to reframe your thoughts. You know, how to not let yourself get sucked up into that black hole more. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is limiting your time online. And why would we talk about that? Because if you look at how people's UV light, right? We are evolved to only see so much UV light, right? To only see much of the light spectrum. Why? Because if you right now could see the whole light spectrum, you'd go crazy. You would see electromagnetism, you'd see gamma rays. Your brain is not built for that, and you would not be able to handle it, okay? Well, with all this uncertainty, right, there's only so much that's knowable. Very little every day is actually real and knowable. But people are watching the news. I know some people 8 hours a day, just constantly on, and they don't know how toxic that is. You're not really getting that much new information, right? So what we want to do with this, right, this premeditating machine, this new part that can help us from panic and help us have a better life because we can do things that we don't just feel like doing, right? We want to make premeditative decisions. So again, we're not built for constant negative information, right? So we encourage everybody, okay, watch the news. Pick 2 times to do it. Know when you're going to do it. Don't let yourself succumb to, oh, I'm kind of curious again, because you're succumbing to systems that are there for survival, just survival, not well-being. So careful, okay? We all want to see what's going on. It's very tempting, and you know, the better journalists make it more dramatic, but very important. Try to watch credible news sources. Only watch them for a little bit, a couple times a day. Okay, next one. Let's talk about reframing our thoughts. I have no idea how I'm doing on time, so Daniel, if you need to speed me up, let me know, okay? So let's see. So reframing thoughts. What does that mean? It's similar to a little bit what I've been talking about. It's if we leave it to these guys back here, right? Like someone cuts you off on the freeway, then your thought, the way you're framing the thought is idiot, you know, and you want to go for that person. He's a jerk, right? Because you're really in a micro perspective. And what we're looking for throughout our life is to become wiser and wiser and wiser people. What does that mean? That means we know more about acceptance, and we know more about how to work with ourselves in a way that keeps us even. So for example, if you saw a 70-year-old on the freeway screaming at some 20-year-old that cut him off, you would know that's not a very wise 70-year-old. Why? Because you'd think that guy's had to be through this, what, 50 times at 70 years old? He's still acting like it's a new problem. Right? Like he's still surprised, right? So wisdom is that you can premeditatively know that that's going to happen, and you can have a strategy, right? So one strategy, for example, is like that reframe would be, oh, so any road ragers out there, here's your strategy. I'm going to get cut off another 100 times in my life. I'm going to deal with the real malevolent jerk next to me 70 times, right? Next time it happens, I'm just taking my share, man. It ain't personal. It's not this guy. It's those type of people that there's no way around. So that's an example of using our history to get into a spot where we can use a macro to be a wiser person, okay? So what are other reframes that we can use, right? So that we don't slip into this chronic negativity, that we don't slip into panic. An example of that, of a macro, would be like, this too shall pass. That the idea is, I'm going to find purpose through this, right? I'm a part of something that's very important in history, and with the people that I support and support me, we're going to fight and we're going to make it through this. So one good thing for people to do, believe it or not, is actually look at history. If they haven't studied history, study history, because it gives you experience with what people do in these kind of situations to get a sense of how they reframed it to be okay. And reframing it isn't changing the reality. It's getting the wiser reality, as per the freeway example, okay? Okay, so next thing we're going to talk about is the thing that probably most therapists are telling people. It's probably the largest thing out there on the internet, which is have a routine, right? Why would we have a routine? For those of you who don't know about Jordan Peterson, in my opinion, he's probably the greatest psychological thinker of our time. And so there's a lot of good work he's done over chaos and order. And so, like, obviously we're in a lot of chaos. How do you fight that? Purpose and order. Okay. So why would we pick a routine, right? Because you want to combat, again, that uncertainty. And we want to make use of this time. Okay. So the basics are: choose responsibility, choose discipline, choose purpose. I'm going to come out of this thing better. So, for example, it is actually more important than you might think to have a sleep schedule. People are telling themselves, it's cool, man. I mean, I'm working from home. I'll do it at 12. Not good. Not the way. It's not good for people. We actually don't do well that way. Again, you don't want to mess with what's helped us survive too much for the last how many million years. And part of it is having important things that we do. So if you are working from home, or even if you're not right now working, or you're retired, or you're out of a job, we must find some schedule. So I tell everybody, all of my clients know, I want them to have a schedule. I want them to have a calendar, and they must have a ritual in the evening of time blocking. Now, a ritual isn't like, I'll do this at 10 o'clock. A ritual is a sequence in time. So I tell people, okay, before you eat dinner or after you eat dinner, before you brush your teeth or after you brush your teeth, something that happens every day, but not necessarily at the exact same time on the atomic clock, okay? So at one point in the evening, they get out their calendar and they plan what's going to happen the next day. And the general thing is, you want 6 hours of something hard to do, or something that you're learning, or something that's not just recreating, okay? So you'll have and then in the morning, the idea is, I start when I say I'm going to start, okay? And then sometimes it's a good idea to have an accountability partner. Maybe you have a friend that you want to keep each other on a certain degree of discipline, right? So sleep schedule, include exercise every day. The math, the research on this says, yes, you can do a lot right now with all the extra time, but just 20 minutes of walking a day, if you could do it twice a day, incredible benefit to the mind and the body. So you don't need a ton, okay? So things like scheduling time to learn a language, to learn music, to learn to take the time to decorate one of your rooms, to put order in where there's not. Like I said, to learn your history, I'm stumbling at trying to learn guitar, and I keep telling myself, maybe I'll do it now, but so far I'm still working 40 hours a week, but that may be something I do if I all of a sudden get a lot of time. So have a schedule. Do not blow it off. A lot of people are getting grandiose. It's not a good idea. Like, life has rules. Yeah, you know, you don't want to be too ordered, but you don't want to be too chaotic. You got to ride that line. Okay, so we're almost done. So we're going to go through two last ideas. One is, in moments of frustration, to create space for yourself. This is a short one, and this comes out of it's really an agitation containment and endurance strategy for people that are around their family a lot. So if you're not used to being around your kids so much, or your wife, your husband so much, we want to give people something to do to help them with containing their temper, their grump inside, and to be able to endure this thing, right? And the idea is that although we need connection, we want to ask ourselves also, what are we needing for ourselves besides that? And if we're around a lot of people, you'll probably need a little solitude. And so we encourage people to just speak up about that, to say, hey, tonight, I'd like to, to their wives or their husbands, tonight I'd really like to get, 45 minutes alone. Do you mind taking care of the kids? I just want to veg without anything to do, or I'm going to take a solitude walk. Incredibly important. Because what will happen is, the idea is losing temper, bad. Grace, good. No pun intended, John. And that's the idea, right? We want to aspire to be better and better people. And believe it or not, this is what I'm trying to help everybody see. This is a perfect time to do it. You don't have to wait till things are good. This is the time to do it, okay? So, so lastly, in terms of creating time for self-care would be to, again, be responsible for that routine. And then as long as you're doing that, right? If you're creating that, and you're being good to yourself around the order part, around what I'm going to come out stronger, and I'm going to do these things every day, and 6 hours a day, I'm going to stay working at something. Then the idea is to let yourself recreate. A lot of my clients here in Westlake are workaholics, and they don't know what to do because they don't watch Netflix, they don't read novels, they don't paint, right? And like we said earlier, this tests people's paradigms, right? Because workaholism isn't good. Not having a job isn't good. You've got to find that middle. So give yourself permission, as long as you're feeling good about what you're doing in terms of the discipline part. I tell people, give yourself permission to recreate more than you might normally do it. This is the time to stretch that too. So games, puzzles, relaxing exercises, things like Headspace, Calm, things like that. Okay, so just to wrap up, and I think we hopefully have some time for some questions. If there's a ton of resources online, so I just encourage everybody, just literally just on YouTube alone, if you have particular questions that we don't get time to answer today, go on. There's some good information out there. So pleasure to share with all of you. And if there are any questions, be happy to take them.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. We're going to open up for questions and answers now. John, I'm going to send your request to start your video.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, we do have some questions. First one is for Paul. What advice do you give people who are risk adverse and afraid to integrate back into society where people want to socialize?
Okay, wow, that's a great question. So easy answer is get therapy. But what I really mean by that is you have a problem that is very, very common and that there's a solution for, but it's pretty hard to do it alone. Okay, and the way I would tell you, this is actually something I actually heard Dr. Peterson say about adverse conditioning. And the idea goes something like this. I'll probably hack it up, not do it as good as him, but it's something like this. Arachnophobia, right, is a fear of spiders. And the treatment is universal. You go to a behavioral therapist and they break up your fear into little bits, right? So I would say to somebody, can I hold a spider in front of you? And they go, no. I said, well, can I have a spider somewhere outside of the window? No. Could I draw a spider? No. Could I say the word spider? Stop saying that. Could I spell the word spider? Yeah. So, okay, I spell the word. I start with S and we see how far we can get. Okay, now each time that I get through with one letter, I'll ask the person, are you ready to go on to the next step and challenge yourself? If they don't, then you got to tell them, okay, let's keep doing S's. Okay, let's go to SP, SPI. Each time you ask them, they have to choose, okay? Okay, so pretty much any good clinician will get somebody to the point where they might not have spiders all over them, but most people can have a spider in the room and be relatively okay. Here's the myth. The myth is they're not afraid of spiders anymore. Not true. They're still afraid of spiders. But by being courageous, one step at a time, not too far, not too little, they have become to attach bravery and courage to in their psyche as they're dealing with the spider. They're still afraid, but now they've unlocked bravery. They've unlocked things inside of them that they didn't know were there, right? Don't mean to broad stroke the answer, but really the steps to that are get somebody that knows what they're doing to help you to figure out what those small steps are to start getting acclimated again, because there's going to be a lot of agoraphobia as this thing opens up. You know, you're seeing some people just race into a crowd, but a lot of people that are now more used to not being alone, whoever wrote that question has a sense of that. It's quite astute. It actually is going to be harder for those people to step out. So the answer is try not to be in shame about that. Know that it's not you, you're one of many of us. And so the idea is just don't be alone in that and try to reach out to somebody that can help you with those steps.
Great answer. Next question for you, Paul. How do you help others that are having problems coping?
Well, so how do we always try to help people that are coping? Well, rule number one, you want to make sure people have their story straight, right? So why are they having trouble coping, right? So for me, there are so many reasons why people are having trouble coping. For me, I would have to get my head around, what exactly does that mean, right? And because what I would probably do once I understood why they were having trouble coping is make sure they understand why they're having trouble coping. And then I'd set up the challenge. And that would be the idea. It's like, they're having trouble coping for some reason. What is that reason? Is it a childhood issue? Is it a medicine issue? Is it a perspective issue? There's a lot of reasons. And then we would want to set up the solution. So if we had more time, we could look at more specific coping problems. But in general, the idea is you want the person to be honest as they can about what is going on that they're having trouble coping with, and then see the challenging. Like that's why the strategies that I put out there, they're not easy. It shouldn't be. The idea is the solution, there's a price for the solution. So, and then what I would want to do is help that person align themselves with the strength inside them, the courage that it would take to choose to do the kinds of things that they would need to do to get out of the hole.
Excellent. John, this question is for you. How bad could the market turn and how long could it last?
Well, let me say this. Paul talked about being vulnerable, and I'll go first. So one of the things that I discovered I had the bad habit of doing was asking myself a very bad question. And the question was, being an African-American, a Black guy in the securities business, I mean, how many do you know? I don't know many either. So my question was, will I ever be good enough? Now, notice how I worded the question. What does Paul will tell you? I'm sure. We ask him. It comes from a place of I'm not good enough, which is a decision that I made way back when. And so I had to get my mind around, well, wait a minute. You made up that factoid. Can you make up another one? So I changed the question. I said, why don't you take the time? What would have to happen for you to figure out what other people are doing? How do you think, what kind of work do you think they do? Let's go find out. Now, see, that's an open-ended question. When we ask a closed-ended question, why am I so bad at golf, whatever it might be, there's only one answer. Here's the list. Okay, done. All right, now let's ask open-ended questions. Let's see. First thing I need to do is figure out what kind of work do my peers do? And then let's see what I would judge as a C, average. And then maybe the question becomes, what do I need to do to be above average? And honestly, I will tell you that has been, at least for me, very impactful for me to recognize, let's just see where average is, and then let's see if I can build a team that includes people like Daniel and Jasmine, where we're constantly looking at what we can do that's better than average. And by the way, that's one of the reasons we're doing this work, because the industry has only told you one thing: buy and hold, sit and take it, hold and hold. And I've got to share with you, it just doesn't work. That worked 40 years ago. It doesn't work today for a lot of people. But if we don't see the distinctions, we only keep doing the same thing because that's what people keep saying. All right. So now, how bad could it get? I can't see the future. But one of my, according to me, best lines is, it's never about the prediction. It's always about the preparation. I don't know when the next hurricane is going to hit. I don't know when the next earthquake's going to hit. But if we're ready, we might be able to survive whatever happens and tell our own story. So what I'm saying to you is this: don't be afraid to use the word math. Don't be afraid to use the word recession. Okay, don't be afraid to use the word depression. Study history, recognize these things happen, often out of our control, but how can we be ready for them, all right? Specifically, I'm saying I think a depression is in order. And the last one, the market was off 80%. And by the way, it took about 25 years to get back to even. Suppose it happens on your watch. I wouldn't be surprised if it does. But how can we limit our losses so that you can afford to survive what these events happen, okay? It could be 80%. It happened before. I don't know why it couldn't happen again. Dr. Michio Kaku, astrophysicist, I had a chance to meet him and chat with him. He said he thought it was going to happen under the last administration. Our research team thought exactly the same thing, and it's interesting because they don't talk. I asked both sides. And they had exactly the same perspective. It didn't happen, but some would assert, because it didn't happen, guess what? The problem's only gotten bigger. We kicked the can down the road a little further, and we're now 10 years older than we were 10 years ago. So we'll see. In terms of how long it could last, again, I like what Paul said. You know, let's look at history. What I can tell you, we just talked about the New York Stock Exchange, or the Dow. It took 25 years to get back to even. And keep in mind, if you're an adult in the early 1900s, life expectancy was mid-50s. So that suggests to me, if you had any money, $1 million in 30 months went to 108,000. It took 25 years to get back to even, assuming you didn't spend a dime and you held on to the same 10 stocks that just got crushed. I don't know who would do both of those things, but suppose someone had notice if you life expectancy was mid-50s, that suggests to me that you were pushing daisies long after, for a long time. In other words, the market did not come back before you started pushing daisies. That's I don't like that story. I don't want that to happen on my watch. Why we do what we do. And the more recent answer, and this relates to Larry Kudlow just said, there's no racism in America. I know Larry, he doesn't remember me, but I remember him. So there's some things we absolutely do not see eye to eye on. And he suggests that it's going to be a V-shaped recovery. Now, I haven't seen one of those, but I submit to you that that might be very optimistic. Take off the rose-colored glasses, stop drinking the Kudlow Kool-Aid is what I say to my clients, and let's look at reality. What we can see is history. Twice in in the US, it took about 25 years for stocks to come back, took about 40 years for New York real estate to come back. That happened on our watch. More recently, we knew that Japan in 1988, 1989 was going to be #1 in gross domestic product. That never happened. They didn't get there. In fact, it seems as though they stalled out around late 1989. And notice the stock market dropped in 30 months, about 80%. Sound familiar? About a year, the real estate market in Japan dropped about 70%. Sound familiar? Almost direct correlation to what we saw on this side of the pond. Now, here's the trick question. Which one has gotten back to even? It's a trick question, and you know the answer. Neither is the correct answer. That's from 1990. So one analyst I saw on Bloomberg today says she thinks it could be a K-shaped recovery. That's interesting. That's not whoosh. That's not hopeful. That's not V. K, where some things go up dramatically and a lot of things go down dramatically. What I see in terms of what happened in the US and what happened in Japan, it was mostly an L-shaped recovery. It never did for a very long time. So imagine whether it's stocks or real estate, and it's been 30 years later and you're still not back to even. Just try and wrap your mind around that. and it's near impossible. So as I say, we are in unprecedented times, which I submit requires us to have unprecedented responses. Let's do our homework, see how bad it could be for you, and then see what you can do so that you can live with that, as opposed to me telling you, well, you know, buy and hold, sorry, sit and take it, sorry, hold and hope. Got any more money? That's what the industry does. That's one of the reasons we're doing what we do. There are better answers, there are better responses, and there's better preparation.
Thank you, John. Last question, and we'll start wrapping up for Paul. How important is it to set boundaries?
Well, okay, that's a good one. It's broad, but it's good. So we talk about boundaries a lot in therapy. Boundaries are what's a word more than essential, more than critical. They are, if you don't have boundaries, you cannot be healthy, right? So there's boundaries. Boundaries are basically a self-imposed rule, right? It's an idea. So a boundary might be, I'm only going to have chocolate once a week, right? It's an idea that, I mean, much of what I was saying earlier, that protects me from all these monkeys back here that want what they want when they want it, right? So I have to have a boundary. I have to have an idea that separates me from that I'm going to hold to. It's a discipline. In relationships, I might have a boundary that says, one of the things we talk about a lot is the difference between process and content. If you and I are having a discussion and you start to elevate and break rapport and start acting mean to me, right? Whatever you're talking about doesn't matter anymore to me. I'm going to have a boundary because I have a rule that when people start to mistreat me, I do something about it, right? So my boundary is, I would say, happy to hear you, love to talk about what you want to talk about. Are you able to do that in a way where you're holding your grace? Because if you can, I'm in. If you can't, we'll have to do this when you can, okay? So that's a boundary. So in the COVID situation, the idea is that's what that premeditated routine is for. That's a boundary. It's like, I'm not going to do whatever I feel like doing. No, I'm going to do the wise thing, right? So like one thing that I didn't get to, just because I was a little worried about time, was what people are doing in my office around finances. And, you know, I'm not a financial advisor in any way. What I tell them is go to someone that knows the history, because unless you do, like if you think you're a planner because you've always wanted to do day trading, you can't succeed long term. I mean, the odds are so low. So again, boundaries have to do with creating wise, honest, self-care mechanisms to help me sustain a good quality of life. So what I'll say is they are incredibly important, and the specifics of those, as you can see, we would have to get detail around what area, what boundary. Okay, so I hope that helps.
Well, let me piggyback on that. You talked about day trading. What we're seeing right here, right now, is just looking at it today. This market might be at these levels primarily because of the small traders, not the smart money, okay? And it looks like people who got their PPP check or their, government $1,200, whatever it was. On the one hand, the good news is they didn't run out to spend it. Out of the blue, savings rates, as from what I can see, has gotten to be over 30%. That has not happened since the Great Depression. But a lot of folks are taking this money and buying stocks on margin, small cap stocks. And I see with the likes of E-Trade and Ameritrade, those two powerhouses have 3 million people that have suddenly shown up with these little checks to buy these little stocks, okay? The total is about 5 million. Now, that is often an event like that, where the small traders suddenly come into the fray, is often a sign that we are at the top. So stay tuned. We'll see how this plays out. But this may be, like I say, this may be like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. Remember the cartoons where they run off the face of the earth and they stand there for 2 seconds and then poof, how low can we go? That's the best example I can give you. That yeah, we're holding right now, but stay tuned. We'll see how long you stay in midair.
Excellent. Okay, John, what do we have coming up for next week?
Next week, we're looking at what can we do to create a better world. You know, as I say, savings rates have gone up, drinking's gone up, by the way, thanks to COVID-19. Less spending has happened. You know, it's always good news, bad news. But, you know, what can we do to, I was a Boy Scout, you know, Eagle Scout, and the mantra that the Scoutmasters would always give us, like when we would come to a new scout, a new camp, and it was literal and figurative. The message was, how are we going to leave this campground better than we found it? So it seems to me that was a magnificent mantra in terms of how are we going to leave life better than we found it. And I think one of the things that's happening with COVID is we're connecting with each other. We're seeing each other. We're having conversations. I think that's all healthy. We're not just talking about the 1%ers. We're talking about all of us because we have to. All right. So we'll be talking with a young lady, a good client, who has found an organization, actually one that she found because we donate money to this organization in parts of Africa where they're making very small loans that make a big impact. So she's going to be talking about how she ended up on the board. And this may be, you know, something that sparks other people to think about what can I do right here, right now. And then on the 24th, that's the one I was kind of teasing you with, we're going to have the courage of a conversation about police, the police, the state of race relations. We need to talk about these things. How is it that anybody, allegedly true or not, gets killed after trying to pass a $20 bill? How is that possible? And I mean, you know, and if it hadn't been recorded, nobody would believe it. And I count 6 situations like that just this year, almost identical. So we're going to have a panel of folks. Right now, looks like potentially a mayor, definitely a former LA County sheriff who's seen a whole lot. On that note, by the way, when we talk about police reform, you know, we know that with David Chauvin, he had 18 complaints. Unless I'm mistaken, last time I looked, when it comes to the Los Angeles Police Department, they do not disclose the number of complaints for their officers. I've always had a problem with that, and I think it's time for us to call out what works for us here in America. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it? So we'll have a good panel, might include a district attorney, might include a, you know, the county sheriff, we'll see. But we're going to have a panel and we're going to talk about some of these things and look at what action items, Paul, we can individually undertake to make the world a better place. And then for those who who want to see, if they don't own active management, what are the details? We'll be talking about that in line with Independence Day on July 1st, or Wednesday webinar. How specifically does this active management concept work? It's relatively new. Mutual funds were designed back in the 40s. The active managers, I believe, the ones I know about, came into existence around the mid 80s. The more came to the table starting around 2000. But it's our preferred way of managing money, as I say, to limit the losses by not holding shares, selling shares when the market's going to the ground, to the floor, and getting back in the market, taking on the risk as we're seeing a meltdown. It's the meltdowns that we want to limit and avoid as much as we possibly can, because they can be so severe, and under the best scenarios, we may not have enough time to recover when we need the money. So we got to limit the losses. So that's what we have on tap. And please feel free to join us, and please feel free to share our webinars with those you know, your peers, your family, and your friends. And yes, if you were not prepared for the last 2 months, you know, when market's off 30%, you may not be prepared for the next 20 years. So this would be a time before the bottom falls out to put in all your props and your preparation to see how you can live with it no matter how bad it turns when it comes to the good, the bad, and the unforeseen. We're really delighted that Paul joined us today. We're really delighted that you are here with us. As I say, please give us your feedback, give us suggestions in terms of what we might cover. Jasmine and Daniel are requiring me to do these every week, so I get to say yes, and I get to show up, and we come up with new material, but it's the same kind of a pattern. I'll talk about the market in terms of what I'm seeing, regardless of what you're hearing in the news, which I think is more valuable, frankly. And here's why. A lot of the folks that you hear in the news are representing companies. Let me say it to you another way. You may know that it's common practice for portfolio managers to receive a bonus when the portfolio manager of the mutual fund or the ETF beats their benchmark and their peers. Now, let's suppose I didn't make this up. If the market's off 37%, the good news is a true story with a woman portfolio manager where her portfolio was off 31%. Market's off 37, she's off 31%. What do you think would be a reasonable bonus for this portfolio manager to receive? You have no idea, but I'm blown away that in this case, the portfolio manager enjoyed the magnificent bonus of $3 million. That's an indication of what the securities industry does. You wouldn't know it, you didn't know you paid for it, but I'm sorry, being off 10% less than the market roughly, and you get a $3 million bonus, yeah, I want that job too. But what I'm trying to say is we have to pay attention. I mean, even Glenn Beck said we have to be vigilant about all things to see what it is we're doing here. So here's to your health, physically and mental, and your financial health as well. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.